Walter McMillian said, "Justice is forever shattered when we kill an innocent man." This is the story of Walter McMillian. Walter Johnny D. McMillian lived from October 27, 1941 to September 11, 2013. Walter held 2 good jobs and was an African American logger. He and his family resided in a poor, secluded, and predominantly black community near Monroeville, Alabama. McMillian was married to Minnie McMillian for 25 years, and they together had 9 children. At the time of his arrest, McMillian was 45 years old and had no prior felonies. McMillian had 2 significant connections to the white community. He had an affair with a white woman, and one of his sons was married to a white woman. These relationships set the tone for the racial bias within this case. Ultimately, McMillian was wrongfully convicted for the murder of Rhonda Morrison and was sentenced to death. McMillian was eventually exonerated. However, this was not until he underwent 5 appeals and spent 6 years on Alabama's death row.
You didn't kill Rhonda
No,
Morrison?
sir. I ain't never seen Rhonda Morrison a day in my life. God knows I ain't.
Where were you on the day of the murder?
At my house.
Did you ever go into Monroeville on the day of the
No,
murder?
sir.
You never went into town?
Never
that
went to
day?
Monroe, period.
This is the story of how a system that preaches justice attempted to convict an innocent man. On November 1st, 1986, an 18-year-old white woman named Rhonda Morrison was murdered in downtown Monroeville, Alabama. Rhonda was a clerk in the dry cleaning store located 11 miles away from McMillian's home. Rhonda was shot several times in the back in the store in which she worked. There were many mistakes made during the investigation of the crime. Firstly, the evidence was contaminated. During the investigation, Rhonda's body was moved and evidence was tainted. Also, the local police were not well prepared to deal with the murder and investigate the scene, because murders were rare within the small town of Monroeville. The crime was not solved for 7 months, which both feared and angered the citizens of the small community. Walter McMillian was arrested by the new sheriff, Sheriff Tom Tate. Tom had been under immense pressure to find a suspect because of the community's unrest. This community pressure for a conviction is what may have led to Tom's construction of tunnel vision and police targeting present throughout this case. McMillian was immediately held in death row at Holman State Prison. This is highly unusual. Prisoners are not sent to death row before they have had trial, let alone before they are sentenced. It is evident here that the local police force and judicial system intended to find Walter McMillian guilty without any form of physical evidence. During questioning after his arrest, McMillian explained to Sheriff Tate that he was at a fish fry on the morning of the murder. Tate evidently did not care about the facts, responding, "I don't give a damn what you say or what you do. I don't give a damn what your people say either. I'm going to put 12 people on a jury who are going to find your goddamn black ass guilty." This comment is shocking and clearly demonstrates that McMillian was being targeted due to racial bias. After spending 15 months on death row, Walter McMillian was indicted on December 11, 1987. McMillian was indicted alongside Ralph Bernard Myers, a career criminal who provided important but false testimony that ended up convicting McMillian. McMillian was charged with a 2-count indictment for capital murder, which was made capital because McMillian supposedly committed first-degree murder during a robbery. The defense requested to move locations in order to ensure a fair trial because of the large amount of emotion and publicity of the case and the disproportionate white population. Although the judge agreed to move the trial, the resulting move actually created more bias. The new trial took place in Baldwin County, which had a substantially larger white population than the previous trial location. Unfortunately, the local judge took advantage of the situation and undermined the equity of the justice system by increasing racial bias. Walter's trial began on August 15, 1988. The judge on his case was Robert E. Lee Key, Jr., and McMillian was represented by attorney J. L. Chestnut. Both McMillian and Chestnut claimed that Walter's relationship with a white woman alone is what made him a suspect and put him in an easy position to be targeted by the police. It is important to note the context of the time that this was taking place. Alabama was very racially prejudiced towards the black community, causing white and black communities to be racially segregated. As a result, McMillian's relations with a white woman would have made him stand out and put him in the limelight to be noticed and targeted. The trial lasted only a day and a half, and on August 17, 1988, the jury found McMillian guilty of the capital offense charged in the indictment. It is noteworthy that the jury was significantly racially biased. 11 of its 12 members were white. The jury recommended a life sentence based on the witness testimony. The prosecution's witnesses were Ralph Myers, the man who was co-indicted with McMillian, in addition to 2 other men named Bill Hooks and Joe Hightower. It is important to note that McMillian had the right within the United States Constitution to be tried by his own peers. However, 11 of those on his jury were white. Shockingly, the only evidence of guilt against McMillian comes from witness testimony. Myers testified that he was in McMillian's pickup truck outside of the cleaners when McMillian went in to rob the store. However, it was later proven that Myers testified because he was on trial awaiting a possible death sentence for murder, and an Alabama Bureau of Investigation agent used that information to pressure him to lie about McMillian. This is a clear indication of police coercion with a witness. Additionally, it was later proven that the other 2 witness accounts were false also. Both Hooks and Hightower testified that they saw McMillian's low-rider truck outside of the store at the time of the murder. However, the truck had not been converted to a lowrider until several months after the murder. Thus, this testimony by Hooks and Hightower was impossible and fabricated. The prosecution was unable to present a motive or physical evidence against Walter McMillian.
Well, all you got to do is you go along with what we want you to go along with. And he says, I promise you, he said, I've done got it fixed with the DA, I've done got it fixed with the judge, and you won't get but 30 years.
To make matters worse, the jury ignored numerous alibi defense witnesses. Several black members of the community testified that Walter was at a fish fry at the time that the crime took place. This testimony matched the story that McMillian told Sheriff Tate shortly after he was arrested and provided him with a concrete alibi. It is noteworthy that these witnesses were black. Clearly, this is an example of how black people can be voiceless within the justice system, in this racist instance, and likely in others as well. This bias was not unintentional. Several years later, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals determined that both Judge Key and the prosecuting DA intentionally selected a majority white jury. In a shocking move, Judge Key dismissed the jury's recommendation of a life sentence and sentenced Walter McMillian to death on September 19, 1988. The judge felt no sympathy, saying McMillian deserved to die for killing a young woman. Again, there was no physical evidence against McMillian, so this remark by the judge indicates a preconceived conviction and removes Walter's right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty. Beginning in November 1988, a Harvard Law School graduate named Brian Stevenson led McMillian's appeals. Stevenson directed the novel Alabama Capital Representation Resource Center, which provided pro bono representation to dozens of death row convicts. Shortly after taking the case, Stephen was instructed by Judge Key to remove himself from the case. Stevenson later acknowledged how strange and uncomfortable this was. This is just another example of the residing judge undermining McMillian's right to an attorney, a fair trial, and an appeal. McMillian's first appeal was unsuccessful. Both his conviction and sentence were upheld in 1991. Fortunately, his lawyer Brian Stevenson did not give up. After Ralph Myers was sentenced, he revealed shocking information to McMillian's trial counsel. He admitted that his testimony against McMillian was false. Myers admitted that he was not even present when the murder occurred. Myers took this confession a step further. He revealed that he was intimidated by officers to testify in exchange for lenient sentencing. This is an example of police intimidation of a witness in order to gain false evidence towards a conviction. It puts a vulnerable person in a position to take a deal that will improve their livelihood at the expense of an innocent man, Walter McMillian. It now becomes apparent that a testimony in which the entire conviction against Walter was made was fabricated as a form of police coercion and misconduct, and Walter was being sentenced to death on no grounds at all. Despite this information, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals denied these claims.
Gunshots.
Right.
When you went inside, what did you tell them you saw?
I told them that I had seen a young girl laying on the floor with her mouth open,
Dead. And what was he doing?
taking money from out of a paper sack, put it into a briefcase.
Did he have a gun?
Yeah, I had told the court that, yeah.
Now, that testimony put him on death row.
Right.
Was it true?
No, sir, not at all. Nowhere near true.
On February 23, 1993, the tide of McMillian's case finally started to change. After 5 appeals, judges of the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals unanimously agreed that the prosecutors withheld crucial evidence that could exonerate McMillian, particularly Myers' confession that his testimony was coerced. As a result, McMillian's conviction and death sentence were reversed, and a new trial was appointed for the case. Additionally, the appeals court found that the DA prosecuting the case, Theodore Pearson, did not disclose several recorded statements made by Myers. This evidence demonstrates that Myers complained that he was being forced to implicate McMillian. Myers goes so far as to say that he did not even know McMillian. Further, the court found that the testimony from the other 2 witnesses, Hooks and Hightower, was fabricated because McMillian's truck was not a lowrider as it was described by the witnesses at the time of the murder. This is evidence of corroboration with the witness testimony provided by Myers. It is clear that all of the testimony that had been linking McMillian to this murder is false, and there is absolutely no evidence tying him to this case in which he has been sentenced to death. After the new trial was granted, McMillian's attorney, Brian Stevenson, filed a motion to dismiss all charges against McMillian. A week later, the presiding judge granted this motion. All charges against McMillian were finally dismissed. Attorney Stevenson later expressed his disappointment in the legal system. He highlighted how easy it was to sentence an innocent man to death and how difficult it was to exonerate him. McMillian's case brought permanent change to the legal system in Alabama. After his exoneration, McMillian filed a civil lawsuit against several of those involved in his prosecution. McMillian would end up settling out of court. However, his case inspired Alabama's compensation statute in 2001. It is important to note the systemic racism that is inherent within the justice system, ultimately affecting the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. McMillian was lucky to have received a determined and well-equipped lawyer for his case, but it is way too often that marginalized groups receive representation that is not adequate enough to help their case. It becomes evident that had Walter McMillian not received Brian Stevenson as his lawyer, he may have been one of the many people to perish as a result of wrongful conviction and inadequate legal defense. After Walter's exoneration, he took it upon himself to spread knowledge about the death penalty and wrongful convictions. Walter's story is being shared through the 2019 movie known as Just Mercy, that depicts the true hardships of Mr. McMillian's wrongful conviction. Not only does it shed light on the specific case of Walter McMillian, but it raises awareness to injustices of the criminal justice system that still occur today.